And we're live. I'm Douglas Ferguson with Damien. Welcome, Hadassah.
Hi, Douglas. Thank you for having me today.
Of course, yeah. And we were just chatting here about just kind of getting prepped, and I'm excited about what we chose to dive into today, which is this idea of executive sponsors and conversations that we might be having with them, and even considerations with ourselves and our co-facilitators around how we just plan for and take care of our people.
Absolutely. No, it was really interesting just to start this idea of what does advocacy look like? Like in practice, in reality, because we were playing with this idea of there's this ideal or idealized advocacy or session that we might run where everybody is completely engaged in the right way, and we've designed the experience for every type of like learner and ability and role in the room. Nobody gets too tired. The breaks are timed perfectly. Every engagement is what it needs to be. And then there's the reality of the practice, right? Where, as we were talking about, sometimes sessions are, we aren't set up with the perfect criteria in place. And so then as experienced designers and facilitators, how do we work within the criteria that we actually have, but still be advocates for people to connect and learn and be creative? Which I'm always, as a facilitator and as someone who puts experiences together, I'm always thinking with two hats. So I'm thinking, what do I need this group to do, right? Like, what's the objective? But then what can I learn about what's going to work in this scenario for this type of group or this type of moment, right? So I'm like designing my experience design as I go, which is fun. I take my notes afterwards. So
it's interesting. You mentioned like addressing the constraints, and I think as designers we're all very aware of constraints, and the thing I find the most common point of frustration for folks is when the constraints seem artificial. So in the example you gave when we were chatting before the show was I think very something people run into a lot, which is the executive sponsor, whoever's in charge of working with you to design this event, this thing, this workshop, is wanting to go all day long, and you're like, that's not a best practice for virtual. But they're not wanting to budge. That seems artificial, right? We know it's been proven, it's a best practice. There's tons of stuff out there. We all write about it and talk about it. But what do we do in that situation, right? And the fascinating thing that we were kind of unpacking was this idea that we don't have to make everything perfect, right? Sometimes delivering an experience for our participants that allows them to be better than things are today. If we move past the status quo in some way and we've given them an experience that allows them to work better, that can be pretty phenomenal. Even if we have to break some of our rules, some of the stuff we write about and say, never do this. It's like sometimes we have to do it just to get them to a better place than they are today.
Totally. Yeah. And the thing that came to mind there was thinking about designing for moments, right? And like, that's where I think about like play and engagement as interventions. Like, okay, we are going to do this like 5-hour block. We're going to take as many breaks as we can fit in. And like, whenever possible, we're going to pause to adjust how people are experiencing this through some sort of moment of play or a mini game, or something that allows, even if we were joking about science class earlier, right? Even if like there might be some part of the experience that we're like, yeah, it's non-optimal, we're changing the tenor of the overall thing. And it's interesting. So like I work as a facilitator and strategist, and I also work as a like financial coach and program designer. And I feel very in tune with designing for that middle road when it comes to experiences around finance and money, because I work with a lot of like really progressive people and folks who are like, man, this system seems really unfair and like it's not designed for everyone to succeed. And I'm like, you're onto something there. And given where you are with the criteria, right, around you in terms of how things are actually functioning, what are the better choices you can make that are the small choices, so that overall you're stacking up, moving towards how you want to interact with the system, or you're contributing to change in ways that are feasible today. And so I think, to me, this is like it's a good parallel when we think about designing for facilitated experiences. Okay, so ideally the whole thing is perfect. That's not actually how life functions in reality. So how do we really make sure that there's these moments that matter along the way where we can hit what we can change, and get people to connect around.
Yeah, I love this kind of paradigm you're describing, and it aligns with the way we talk about assessment points. If think about the journey you want to take someone on, what are the waypoints or the assessment points we have to have? Everything else is just decoration, right? The activities or the setups or whatnot we could swap those in and out, as long as we're hitting those points that we know we need to hit, and we're using those moments to understand, did we get there? How are people doing? And how off are we? Do we need to course correct in some way?
And for you, is an assessment point like what do you use? Is it like playbacks, recaps, room temperature checks? Is it this type of thing or something else?
It can be any sort of thing. Assessment kind of makes you think of a quiz or like a check. I mean, it could just be an internal check as a facilitator. Maybe we do a thing and we're just observing how people are reacting so we can get a chance to the room. So you can use any number of tools. Part of it's just this mental acknowledgement that it's there. It's a moment that we're aware of, that we're going to pay attention to when we get there.
So back to this, like, two things are happening, right? When you're facilitating, is the room moving? What's going on? And what do I understand about how I'm moving this experience forward for people?
And where might assumptions be, or where might I be unclear? And a pro move is to speak that out loud.
Oh yeah.
Something I'm unsure of is, like, say it and let the group respond, because they will respect you. It's so much more authentic. And gosh, it'd be better to know that than to send folks off a cliff.
Oh man, yeah. I always love saying, like, hey, it looks like I'm seeing some confusion on some faces here. Are we tired? Do we have questions? Yeah, just naming it as opposed to being like, you're fine, and keeping moving. Because then that's the equivalent, right, of taking people through that. You might as well put the slide deck on automatic. Yeah. You'll read it. You'll be fine. Yeah.
I really loved your use of the word intervention, and it aligns with the kind of fun and play that you were mentioning when we were chatting before the show around, energizers, and are they energizing? Are they still energizing in this pandemic we're in and stuff? And I think the word that comes to my mind is obligatory, right? If it's an obligatory thing we're just doing, or we just pulled it out of a book at random, it's not truly an intervention, because an intervention takes intention and care, and there's a reason it's happening. And so I love that word. And I think if we apply it more to those moments of play, where play is an intervention, it's not meant to be just goofing off. It's like, hey, we're inserting it to change the energy because we were attuned to the fact that something happened, and we're using it to shift.
Totally. Yeah, no, my years as an MC kind of taught me to hone all of that. Because you can lose a group of people very, very quickly. And to your point, especially if you're not being authentic and acknowledging that the group is drifting, or something off tone just happened, right? Hey, people won't trust you. And at the same time, there's so much research about how laughter, or like the experience of fun or the experience of play, can heighten energy for many minutes after you have laughter and experience of fun and experience of play. And so there's two reasons to do it. Number one is to honor the tone that's in the room, but then also to get to help people actually stay present to what's going on, right? To kind of steward that presence back to where we are. And I think a lot, I mean, I miss, I miss like live experience design. I'm looking forward to like when there's more of it. Being at the conference at Control the Room was so much fun because it was an incredible example of live experience design. Y'all did awesome. You know, but there's still so many things that translate to virtual experience design because we're still live. We just don't have, you know, the same energetics. But there's still so much that we can do to make sure people are connected. And this is why I've been asking myself these questions that we talked about earlier about the role of play and fun. Okay, so remote experiences, again, the research helps us understand that people can stay present remotely for less time. That's fine. They can still stay present for a certain amount of time. So how do we make sure that that time is most valuable to them? Right.
Yeah, yes, this notion of focusing on the value and making sure that the participants are kind of front and center. And I think often it can be distracting when we've got, you know, executive sponsor or whoever has brought us in, and they're really focused on their needs and their long-term goals and why they're doing the session. And, you know, and then we get into the room and, oh wow, we've got a bunch of people here that have needs. And have those been considered? I think that's pretty crucial, and sometimes can definitely, I don't know, it can be obscured by all the other mechanics and by all the other logistics and kind of just needs of the organization or of the project.
This seems like a good setup for a creative tensions exercise, right? So you've got your people and they're going to go to one side of the board or the other, one side of the room or the other. And on one side, you've got the business goals and objectives are the most important thing. And on the other side, you've got participants' needs are the most important thing. You could get some really interesting responses out of that because both matter a ton, right? When we're in the room doing our work. Yeah, and I feel that often it's on reflection, right? I spend a lot of time really thinking about the business objectives and the goals, especially in design, objective design and agenda design, these milestones that we're going to hit along the way. And then planning for engagement for people. But I feel like once I'm in the room or in the session, virtual room, a lot of my attention starts to transition to the participants' needs. Mm-hmm. This is a challenge for myself. How do I hit that creative tension right along the way?
Yeah, or even can it surface earlier, so there can be some premeditation. Also, the thing I've discovered is the earlier I can understand that tension. This doesn't always happen, but there's a common use case where there's some tension at the participant level that is in direct opposition with the business goals.
That's right.
I don't mean diametrically opposed, where like they're trying to prevent what's happening, but the strategy or the approach that leadership is currently trying to take is informed only by maybe half of the group or maybe only a quarter of the group. Meanwhile, we've got like the other 3/4 of the group that might be divided into 3 other different perspectives. Then they might have 3 other different needs. And if we understand that, then we can make sure we are mindful of that when we design the sessions, such that we're not putting people at odds. You know, there's not going to be this unnecessary conflict of like, why are we doing it this way, or because that's one of the number one reasons why we have lack of engagement, is because people like fundamentally are disgruntled by why am I being forced to go about it in this manner.
I mean, yeah, buy-in. Oh my goodness. It makes me think about, like, again, future challenge for myself. How do I do some sort of assumption mapping while in session design, right? If it's a critical assumption that everybody believes this strategy is how we should go, but then you can find potentially surface that maybe 3/4 of the group doesn't actually understand why that strategy is what's chosen. And I think a lot about the role of transparency in decision making and giving people why. You don't have to make everybody responsible for every decision. It's inefficient, and And maybe just not the way your organization is structured. But I do think that, especially if you want people to follow a decision path, to help them understand how it got there, so you can get that buy-in and avoid that disgruntlement of, man, why do we have to do it like this? You can answer that.
You know, sometimes it's a maturity curve thing. You got some individuals or some teams, if we're talking about a really large group, that aren't as far along as others.
Mm-hmm.
And now, but we're designing the experience for one segment. So maybe leadership is more aware of the folks that have made further progress. And so we're treating everyone as if they've made that further progress. And sometimes that further progress is mental. I've internalized and accepted this change more than other folks. You know, I've come to terms with what it means, and I'm ready to start planning versus I'm still going through just the turmoil of like how this impacts me. Those are two different sessions.
Totally.
Sessions.
Yeah. Yeah. And both deserve thoughtful experience design and need to be engaged different ways. Yeah.
And to your point around the assumption mapping, it's so hard because if it's someone else's assumptions, you know, if we're doing discovery and we're hearing all this stuff, it sounds fine. And then you get in the room and you make all these discoveries. So I think that's the constant challenge is always asking, am I getting the full picture?
Totally. And yeah. And it's like, I mean, in my experience, the answer is no. But
never, right? It's always
you know, yeah, but to your point, yeah, like some assumption mapping ahead of time, it's going to be impossible, right? So back to this, like, what are the moments that matter? What are the points we're going to hit along the way, that even when we have to pivot, and it's okay that we're pivoting, or we're bringing another group, we're bringing groups of people along at different speeds. I mean, that's the fun and flexibility of facilitation, right? It's all surprises.
No doubt. Incredible. And also I think there the minute that is surfaced, to make it to your point earlier, we have to label it, we have to vocalize it, we have to just make it very visible, because if we try to hide it and just plow through and just hope for the best and get to an outcome, it's going to make people feel worse.
It's true. Yeah. That's the challenge. It's the challenge in the work.
Excellent. Well, we went 15 already, and so I want to thank you for the time today. We got to some really cool stuff there. We hit on quite a few awesome points, and hope folks leave comments and continue the conversation. And I look forward to talking to you soon, Hadassah.
Totally. It's always a pleasure, Douglas. Thank you. Have a great day.
You too.